Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. And if you enjoy these podcasts, I would appreciate it if you take a minute to rate and review it on your podcast destination of your choice. And today, what I wanted to share, and it occurred to me, gosh, I wonder if this is going to be controversial. I was once told by a psychic that my work was going to be very controversial, and I found that funny because I'm not a particular fan of conflict. So it didn't really sound real to me, but I have found over the years that what to me sometimes seems like common sense, to other people sometimes sounds controversial. So I'm going to just flag that. What I'm going to share today is a whole new way of thinking about addiction. But I'm not saying I'm right and everybody else is wrong. I'm just presenting it as a whole new way of thinking about it. And where it came from, where I first really noticed how different addiction looks to me than it seems to look to a lot of other people, is I do a lot of supervision as part of my training. So I train coaches and I train teachers and I train people to do the kind of work that I do in the world. And one of the ways that I do that is I'll listen in to a session that they've done with one of their clients, and then I'll offer feedback. And I was listening to a particular session recently, and the coach and client were talking about addiction, and the coach was trying to help the client with their addiction issues. And the question that kept coming to my mind as I listened was, I wonder what they mean by addiction. And when I talked with the coach about it, it hadn't even occurred to them that you could mean anything by addiction other than, addiction. But when we looked at it together, what I saw is that addiction is a label that we use to make sense of a pattern of thoughts and feelings and behaviors that seem connected. So to make that a little less abstract. So if somebody thinks that they are addicted to sugar, let's take one that is a little more innocuous than some of the more intense addictions, and they go, well, yeah, I've got a sugar addiction. What they mean is that they think about eating something sweet and they feel like, oh my God, I would love that. And if they try to not think about it or not eat it, that feeling that they call a craving gets even more intense. And it gets more and more intense until they eat something sweet. And then it's like, and then they start to think about it again and it winds up again. And that whole pattern is called an addiction. And in some places, they take it a step further and don't just say, I have an addiction. They make it a part of who they are. I am an addict. Now, whatever else human beings are, the one thing I can promise you is they're not addicts. They may have what we call an addiction. They may have a lot of cravings for things that aren't healthy for their body or mind and lead to problems. But who we are is so much bigger than anything we experience, than any of our habits, than any of our patterns. Who we are is vast. Who we are, as best I can tell, is pure presence, pure consciousness, pure aliveness. And we think. One of my favorite quotes comes from a guy named Jack Pransky, who said, all we are is peace, love, and wisdom, and the power to create the illusion that we're not. Now, if it sounds like I'm picking hairs by saying, well, all addiction is a set of patterns of thinking and feeling and acting, and one of the reasons why I think it matters is because for most people, when they think of something as an addiction, they feel helpless and hopeless before they start. because addictions are a big deal and they're very hard to do anything about. And so if you've got an addiction, oh my God, that's so much worse. I mean, if it's just a bad habit, maybe you can work with that. But an addiction is a thing. It has biochemical consequences. And my suggestion, and that's all it is take a bit of time to consider the possibility that calling that set of thoughts and feelings and behaviors an addiction isn't helpful. But when you just look at it for what it is, you suddenly see, oh, maybe I'm not as stuck with this as I thought I was. Maybe if there has to be thoughts about the thing that I think I shouldn't have, but I want, but I shouldn't have, but I want, but I shouldn't have, but I want, well, maybe I don't have to engage with that thinking every time it comes up. Maybe I can let it come up and go and move on to the next thought and the next and the next. If part of this pattern that we call addiction is just a feeling of unsettledness that comes with the thought, you know what would fix this? Sugar, alcohol, heroin, sex, whatever it is that I think I'm addicted to, that I don't have to believe that just because I think it. I can just kind of stay with the feeling and notice that it comes and goes. It doesn't have a life of its own. If I stop thinking it, I stop feeling it. I might notice that if it's not an addiction, it's some habitual thoughts and some habitual feelings and some habitual actions, then I can even think all those things and feel all those things and just not do the thing. Not drink the drink, not eat the food, not whatever else fits with whatever pattern that you're looking at. Then it doesn't look so hopeless. It doesn't look so helpless. You don't feel a victim of your own imagination anymore, of your own system, of your own biology. And I just notice that people do really well when they don't start with hopelessness, when they don't start with helplessness, when they can see that our thoughts and feelings and actions, and this is one of my favorite phrases, what we think, what we feel, and what we do is semi-volitional. In other words, we probably don't control it as much as we'd like to, but neither are we helpless victims of it. As I say sometimes, it's not up to you, but it's not up to you. You actually have a remarkable amount of say in what you do with any thoughts that come to mind, how you are with any feelings that come up in your body, and what you do or don't do with your body. And if you look at it clean without the stigma or threat or overwhelm or helplessness of addiction as a description of what's going on, it's actually surprisingly easy to just feel your feelings without doing anything about them, to let thoughts come and go without having to change them or fix them, and to not act, to not do with your body anything you don't want to do. Now, I'm going to go a little bit sideways to demonstrate it. I remember having a conversation once with somebody who was feeling really overwhelmed and helpless because they couldn't stop themselves from cutting. Now, as it happens in my experience, when somebody cuts, it's their way of dealing with an uncomfortable feeling and an uncomfortable thought. It actually gives them relief from it. But the bit of it that we talked about was whether or not they had to do it. And I, as an example, I said to them, without touching me, make me cut you. Now, I was never going to do it, trust me, but I wanted to make a point. And they kind of said, well, I can't. I was like, right. And I said, so without using your hands, make yourself cut yourself. And somewhere in the space that followed, they had an insight. They realized that something that had felt involuntary, that something that had felt that it just took them over, was actually semi-volitional. And that just because they had the thought and the feeling, they didn't have to do the behavior. And over time, they got enough freedom around the thought and the feeling. And feeling the feeling didn't look so scary. So having the thought didn't look so scary. Because they knew even if they had the thought and the feeling, they weren't going to do the thing. So I just invite you to consider if all you did was not think about your quote-unquote addiction as an addiction, but just let yourself experience it as thoughts, feelings, and actions, how that experience might start to become something that you can easily do something about, instead of something you have to wrestle with for the rest of your life. Have fun, learn heaps, happy exploring, and I'll talk with you soon.